Everybody, I think we've got everybody either on teleconference or video conference now, so we will get underway. I declare open the hearing of the Joint Standing Committee on the National Disability Insurance Scheme. These are public proceedings, although the committee may determine or agree to a request to have evidence heard in camera. Proceedings for today are recorded and may be broadcast and media may be present. I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee they're protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as contempt. It is also contempt to give false or misleading evidence to a committee. If a witness objects to answering a question, the witness should state the ground upon which the objection is taken, and the committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer, having regard to the ground which is claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request that the answer be given in camera. Such a request may also be made at any other time. A witness called to answer a question for the first time should state their full name and the capacity in which they appear, and witnesses should speak clearly into the microphones to assist Hansard to record proceedings. Could also remind those contributing that you cannot divulge confidential, personal or identifying information when you speak. If you wish to supplement your evidence with written evidence or information, please forward it to the Secretariat after this hearing, and can ask everyone to ensure they've switched off or turned to silent their mobile phones. And on video link and teleconference today, I have the Deputy Chair, Senator Brown, Senator Hughes, Senator Steele John, Ms Coker, Dr Martin and Ms Payne. Can I now welcome representatives from the Department of Social Services and the National Disability Insurance Agency. Thank you for appearing before the committee once again today. I remind officials that the Parliament are resolved that an officer of a department or agency of the Commonwealth or of a state or territory shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of the officers to superior officers or to a minister. This resolution prohibits only questions asking for opinions on matters of policy and does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. For the Hansard record, can I ask each of you to state your name and the capacity in which you appear, perhaps starting with you, Mr Hoffman and colleagues from the NDIA.
Good afternoon, Mr Andrews. Good to be with you. Martin Hoffman, Chief Executive, National Disability Insurance Agency.
Sarah Johnson, Scheme Actuary, National Disability Insurance Agency.
And Lisa Studdert, Deputy CEO, National Disability Insurance Agency.
And Mr Mansfield and your colleagues at DSS?
They're on mute.
I think you're on mute.
Do you have us now, Chair?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
I'm Debbie Mitchell. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Disabilities and Carers here at the Department of Social Services.
Luke Mansfield, Acting Chief Operating Officer.
Peter Broadhead, Group Manager, NDIS Participants and Performance.
Paul Hardcastle, Acting Branch Manager, Australia's Disability Strategy.
And Ms Yend?
Yes, Julie Yend, Branch Manager of the NDIS Governance, Policy and Legislation Branch.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Could I invite either of the agencies to make some opening comments if they wish to do so? Mr Hoffman or Ms Mitchell?
Thank you, Chair. I will make some opening comments if that's okay.
Yes, please proceed.
So, look, thank you for the opportunity to address the Joint Standing Committee on the National Disability Insurance Scheme and assist with its inquiry into current scheme implementation and forecasting for the NDIS. The NDIS is delivering significant benefits to Australians with disabilities. More than 500,000 participants across Australia are now receiving support, with more than half of these participants receiving support for the very first time. Work continues to improve the scheme in line with the participant-focused vision embodied in the 2011 Productivity Commission report. From the outset, it was envisaged that the NDIS would support participants to exercise choice and control over their life with a fair, flexible and consistent package of reasonable and necessary funding. The government is committed to working in partnership with participants, their families and carers and the broader disability community to continue to develop the best scheme possible. The Department of Social Services and the National Disability Insurance Agency have been engaging with and listening to stakeholders on ways in which we can further improve the NDIS. The Commonwealth continues to work with state and territory governments to address interface issues between mainstream services and the NDIS, ensuring that the NDIS and mainstream services, including health, justice, child protection, transport, mental health and education, all operate effectively together as an important way to meet the needs of Australians with disability. The Commonwealth is committed to ensuring that NDIS is fully funded and recognises the importance of financially sustainable scheme in providing certainty for participants and providers and improving the long-term outcomes for Australians with disability. This is reflected in the most recent update to the estimates of expenditure on particular supports for the current and forward years in the mid-year economic and fiscal outlook, which increased those estimates by $26.4 billion. This also reflects the baseline projections in the most recent annual financial sustainability report, the AFSR, which was publicly released by the NDIA in October 2021. The projections in the 2021 AFSR are subject to peer review by a reviewing actuary, currently the Australian Government Actuary. In addition, in August last year, Commonwealth, State and Territory Disability Ministers commissioned work to understand the cost drivers and underpinning assumptions in the AFSR. With support from all jurisdictions, the actuarial firm Taylor Fry was contracted by the Victorian Department of Families, Fairness and Housing to support the work. In their report presented to disability ministers in December last year, Taylor Fry found the projections in the annual financial sustainability report to be reasonable. The full Taylor Fry report is publicly available on the Disability Reform Minister's web pages, hosted on the DSS website, and it is now in an easy read summary. With more than 500,000 participants and budgeted expenditure on participant supports this financial year exceeding $29 billion, the scheme is on a trajectory to significantly exceed previous expectations of the number of people who will be supported by the scheme and the cost per person of supporting them, reaching $41.4 billion in expenditure on more than 600,000 participants in 24-25, at an average cost of more than $62,000 per participant. While media reports focus on claims of funding cuts, in fact, both total expenditure and expenditure per participant continue to grow and are projected to continue to grow further. A critical focus now is engagement with people with disability and disability representative organisations on ways that the scheme delivery can be improved without compromising outcomes for NDIS participants. Additionally, the NDIA publishes a great deal of data, particularly in its quarterly reports to ministers. These and other reports are made available to the public, which allows people with disabilities and their families and carers to see how the scheme is growing, who is supported by the scheme, and the data available on satisfaction and outcomes. Transparency is intended to drive continuous improvement in participant outcomes and ensure a sustainable NDIS. The Department and the NDIA are committed to ensuring the NDIS is a participant-focused program and improves social and economic outcomes for Australians with disability. The Department is supportive of looking at ways to improve the NDIS and values taking the time to assess what work can be done in the future. I look forward to assisting you with this inquiry and working together to improve the NDIS. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms Mitchell. Mr Hoffman, did you have any opening comments?
That's me. Sorry, Mr Chairman. No, I don't. It was a joint statement there from Mr Mitchell. Thank you.
Good, thank you, Mr Hoffman. Can I then lead off? And Ms Mitchell, you referred to the Taylor-Fry report, which I've just got a copy of today, so I haven't had a chance to read it in any detail yet, and I suspect my fellow committee members haven't at this stage. Nonetheless, can I just ask a couple of questions about it, and then maybe that there are other colleagues who might have asked questions about it before we go to other matters, and there may be some questions we would like to put on notice to you. I note what seems to be the bottom line, but correct me if I'm wrong, in that Taylor-Fry say that we regard the middle of the AFSR plausible range as a better guide to expected scheme costs. This is in the executive summary. And on the first page of the executive summary, table 1, if you look at the projections out to 2029-30, the baseline was 59.3 billion. The plausible low case was 53.2 billion and the plausible high case is $74.2 billion. If we take Taylor-Fry's suggestion that the middle of that plausible range is the best guide, am I correct, therefore, in saying that their expectation is that that middle range would be somewhere around halfway between 53 and $74 billion, which would be about 62, 63 billion compared to the baseline projection of 59?
Do you want me to take it? So,
I'm happy to comment on it.
If I may, yes, the actuaries report, and the actuaries here present, does explore a range of scenarios, and in the AFSR, as we call it, the Financial Sustainability Report, there's a low case and a high case. That's what you're seeing reflected in the table that you've cited in the Taylor-Fry report. The baseline projection is the best estimate, if you like, on judgment basis between the high and the low. Taylor-Fry does say that it may represent a moderate underestimate of expected value of future costs. I'd actually put that's a phrase from the report on the same page below that table. They also do say, however, that there is a high degree of uncertainty around those projections, particularly when you get out to the year you're looking at, which is 2029-30. The further out you get, the less certainty there is. So, like all projections, there are some judgment calls and things there which have to be made. And their overall view is that the range is reasonable, but that particularly in the out years, it may represent a moderate underestimate. But that years from now.
Yes. And Ms Mitchell, as I recall, you said that there's an additional $26.4 billion in the revised estimates. Does that cover that middle range scenario?
If I can again assist there, so if you look at the table that you were talking about, the baseline projection in the Taylor-Fry report, which as I say is taken from the annual financial sustainability report, the numbers for that baseline projection are now the numbers in the Commonwealth estimates for participant support. So 29.2 in the current financial year through to 41.4 in 24-25. And if you take those sum over those 4 years compared to the previous Commonwealth estimates, then the difference is $26.4 billion. So they've increased overall over that 4-year period by $26.4 billion.
Yes. And can I ask what ongoing work is envisaged in terms of tracking this into the future? I mean, we know when the expenditure's been made as to what it was, but in terms of projecting forward, particularly in light of the uncertainties that Taylor-Fry have mentioned, what is planned over the next few years in terms of monitoring the potential scenario?
So there may be two parts to that, if I may, Chair, and the scheme actuary may wish to speak about this, of course, because she has a role under the NDIS Act in advising the board about these matters. But essentially what has changed, I think, in the last 12 months is that the annual financial sustainability report, which is an annual report effectively to the board of the NDIA, was published in October, there is a commitment now going forward to publishing that every year as it's produced, and this is the full report. And that is the sort of now the basis on which you would monitor changes in projections over time. There is a lot of information in that annual financial sustainability report, and it is, there's a lot of information in the Taylor-Fry report, which essentially looks at the assumptions and methods and approach that is taken in the AFSR. And in that you can see that there are assumptions about rates of growth in future, so you can look at year on year whether those assumptions are playing out in practice as compared to the assumptions in the model, and revisions can then be made. So it can be monitored. It's an annual revision in the way that the AFSR is done, but it can be monitored through the year. In the current year, of course, the anticipated expenditure now on participant supports is 29.2 billion. You can look at how it's tracking through the year. That doesn't really tell you, because of seasonal fluctuations within the year, how much that is material to the end of year result until you're a reasonable way through the year. But for further on, each year, new data on the history is brought into the AFSR. But I'm talking about the work that Sarah does, so perhaps Sarah would want to add to my answer. Sarah's frozen.
Perhaps I'll, Mr. Chairman, if
Yes,
I may,
Mr. Hoffman, yes.
just add one other comment, and that is there is also the commitment of the Ministerial Council to review the NDIS scheme costs, and the next one of those is due by the end of 2023, and that will be a significant piece of work commissioned by State and Territory Commonwealth ministers. I would imagine, therefore, that a review of what's happened and update of those forecasts is exactly what is required in that review of costs, which was set out in the bilateral agreements between the Commonwealth and the states and territories. So that will be another major piece of work coming up over the next 12 to 18 months.
And Ms Mitchell, as I recall in your opening comments, you mentioned some work being undertaken by the Victorian Government. I think you said the Department of Community Services. Can you just elaborate on that and what the time frame is?
So, Chair, that was on behalf of all jurisdictions. That was actually the Taylor-Fry work.
Right.
That the Victorian Government led that on behalf of all jurisdictions, including the Commonwealth.
Thank you. And in terms, as I said, I haven't had a chance to read the Taylor-Fry report yet, but in terms of the actuarial forecasting, is consideration given to things like quality adjusted life years or some similar approach to non-medical interventions, or the economic benefits of the NDIS in terms of the overall bottom line?
Sarah, perhaps?
I think Sarah's
It's Mr. Hoffman here again. I'll just answer that. So the Taylor-Fry report and the AFSR, which is set out in the rules, in the Act, what it should be required, goes to the issues of the costs of the scheme, numbers of participants, types of participants, and so forth. It doesn't go to the, which I think you may have been asking.
Mr. Hoffman, you just broke up, so if you can repeat the last couple of sentences. We still can't hear you.
I think I should be able to be. Is it back?
In and out a little bit.
I need to move on. In and out, is it?
I can hear you now. No. I'm afraid
Keep moving.
Perhaps if I can assist, Chair, the actuarial report and the Taylor-Fry report, which is another group of actuaries, really are attempting to estimate the expenditure on participant supports, given what's known about, what's happened to date and the trajectories that you can project from those. They don't go to the benefit or the cost benefit, if you like, or the economic effect of those. It's really just trying to understand what the future expenditure will be. The expenditure, of course, is a complicated product of not only the decisions, individual decisions made for each and every participant about what supports are provided in their plan, but then also the decisions that participants make about how to spend the funds in their plan. And so both of these reports focus on the actual expenditure. They don't predict in and of themselves the value of the plans that people hold. They predict the expenditure out of those plans, and they don't go to the actual benefits, if you like. There is data published on the outcomes from the scheme to the extent that's possible, and that is referred to in the opening statement, but it's not part of modelling the overall expenditure at this stage.
Which leads me to one final question from me before I go to the Deputy Chair, and that is it goes to the foundational insurance principles of this scheme. Given that in aggregate there's been a significant increase in cost which has occurred and is projected into the future, to what extent are the foundational insurance principles which were underlying the scheme still valid in terms of the approach?
That's probably a judgment call, but I think the thing is absolutely operating as an insurance scheme in the sense that, and as it was intended to, that Australians who are either born with or later in life incur disability now have a scheme which, provides supports in that eventuality. So previously there wasn't such a scheme in place. It was more funding on a block basis, providers to provide services, and there was, we now know, a fair degree of unmet demand in that arrangement. It is now the case that that if you are born with disability or you incur disability up to the age of 65, that you are now covered in a sense by the disability insurance scheme. The other thing, part of your question, I think, is about the extent to which it provides a lifetime insurance approach. So in other words, I think there is absolutely still an emphasis on early intervention. It's particularly done with children, but not only with children, and about capacity building. In other words, attempting to provide supports that actually influence the trajectory of people's disability and their experience of their disability, to reduce the impact of the disability on their capacity to engage in ordinary life, and at best to actually reduce the impact of their disability to the extent that they're less reliant on support. I would have to say that the numbers that were originally anticipated in the 2011 report, my recollection is that there are actually slightly more people undergoing early intervention under the arrangements as they stand than was envisaged in the original report. So there is a greater number of people coming in under that provision overall in the life of the scheme to date. I think the jury is probably still out, not for want of focus, but because one of the things that people think of the scheme as going for 8 years, but it was trials originally. It only had 30,000 people in it in 2016. It's only really been going as it ramped up from 2016 onwards, and about around half of the people have only been in the scheme for maybe 3 years because of that trajectory of growth. So the time frame over which the scheme has been able to have an impact on people's longer term outcomes is too short, really, to know. You can have some intermediate measures, you can do things that you hope make a difference, but I think the jury is still out and the data is not yet in to show what is most effective, what is less effective, and to have all of those discussions about how you shape the scheme going forward.
And can you suggest a time frame in which we can have some confidence in understanding whether that's working or not?
Look, I think the thing absolutely is working, as the opening statement said, in respect of providing immediate supports. There are more people now receiving more support than was ever the case prior to this scheme. So in terms of providing supports, I think the effects are absolutely there. In terms of the longer term outcomes, things like children staying longer in education, achieving higher rates of educational attainment, that playing through into things like employment and so on, it will be a longer term thing to find out how well that is travelling.
Yes, because we can...
Peter,
go ahead.
Can you hear me again now, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Martin Hoffman here. I've taken myself off video to helpfully improve the audio. Peter's right, although it's important to say that we've been very active from the start in setting up the outcomes framework and reporting regularly against that in terms of health outcomes, seeing lower hospitalisation rates, higher usage of GPs, which is an important leading indicator of health outcomes, measuring employment increases, measuring reported engagement in community by parents in respect of their children. So there's a very detailed outcomes framework that we regularly report against. Peter's right in the sense that some of these are longer term effects, but as the outcome reporting has shown, we are already seeing positive effects across many of the domains that we were expecting in that outcomes framework. But it is a matter of ongoing monitoring and ongoing reporting, and we and the department are well set up to do that.
Yes. If I make a comment, Mr. Hoffman, I think that's important that work be undertaken. I mean, perhaps one of the confusions here is that the word insurance can be understood in various ways. At its most basic, the scheme is an insurance scheme, just like if somebody pays for their own life and disability insurance. The only difference here is it's not the individual paying, it's the government paying on behalf of the taxpayer and the participants generally. But it's that other concept of it in that this is meant to bring about better outcomes for individuals, and if early intervention can do that, well then that's something which I think we need to continue to provide a great deal of emphasis and importance, but I'm editorialising now. I'll go to Senator Brown.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to ask some questions around costs. Firstly, and also it's good to be back. Welcome back, everybody. Has COVID been identified as a cost driver?
Mr.
Senator, I'm not sure if Sarah is back online at this point, but has COVID been identified as a cost driver? COVID is having mixed effects, I would say. It is both a driver of increased cost and a driver of decreased expenditure in some cases. Overall, we don't currently think the effect is particularly large netted out, and so that's why we're still reporting the strong expenditure and strong expenditure growth, as Mr. Broadhead referred to before. We're adding particular COVID-related support, both direct to business and direct to providers. At the same time, there's some evidence of, particularly during lockdown, of some diminution of usage, but equally that is sometimes just a change in the type of services that are supported, that are used, rather than an overall reduction. So we're still, as Mr. Broadhead said, reporting expenditure growth. We put that out monthly now, the 15th of each month, reporting the expenditure for the prior month and cumulative for the year to date. And I think we'll probably need to wait until towards the middle of the year and we get closer to the full year result for 21-22 to make an assessment of that.
So you've factored in any COVID as being having an effect. Then you're monitoring the costs, the extra costs or decrease in costs due to COVID.
Yes, to the extent that you can put a direct causal relationship between them, yes, we're certainly monitoring that. And as I said, I think we will probably at the end of the fiscal year, have a better picture in terms of what the full year result is, taking into account those any COVID impacts. As I said, they work in both directions, up and down, and a change of mix or change of type of support that is used.
Do you also monitor or have feedback about costs on on providers? Because obviously there'll be COVID processes and that would have needed to be put in place. I'm assuming that the NDIA have spoken to providers about what they require in terms of guidelines and safety that have to be implemented at the provider level.
That's right, and so we're regularly engaged with providers, on a daily basis on that front. Likewise, the Commission sets standards or refers to the health standards that providers undertake. We've made adjustments to overhead rates in price limits. We've allowed for direct claiming of additional PPE costs over the last year or so. I think total Lisa can confirm, but there's probably over $100 million worth of additional expenditure directly to providers outside of participant plan expenditure that the scheme has funded in order to meet those COVID-related safety costs.
And those COVID-related costs, they've been factored into your sustainability projections?
Yes, they have, in the sense that we look at them distinctly and trying to make judgments to the extent that they will continue and become permanent or are one-off. It's obviously a difficult projection to make, but the scale of them is large. In the scheme of $29 billion this year, they're relatively at the margin at this point in time.
Right. And you put together minimum guidelines for providers in terms of COVID procedures. I'm particularly talking around supported accommodation.
Of course. The agency does do that. We're not a standard-setting agency in that sense. So the Commission is the person who sets the required standards, and they do that through the taking into account of the health advice from the Department of Health and state and territory level agencies. But it is through the Commission powers to set required standards of performance.
Well, I'll need to ask them a few questions. So so you made an announcement around rats being able to be purchased out of plans, but that's purchased out of core funds, isn't it?
Lisa, do you want to?
Yes, Senator. Lisa Studdert, Deputy CEO. That's correct. We recognise that for supports to continue to be delivered, particularly in disability residential settings, that the use of RATs would be useful in some circumstances, and so that those costs can be recouped from participants' core budget.
Are you receiving any feedback about any issue around cost of RATs or money, the amount of money coming out of people's core funds? Participants' core funds?
Not as yet, Senator. As Ms Topham said, we are in very regular contact with the provider sector and have a very open door to hearing from them if costs do start to become problematic. And of course, to individual participants, they can contact the agency at any time if plan budgets need to be adjusted to accommodate those expenses.
Have you had any feedback around the restriction to purchasing RAT only from core funds?
Not as yet. Not to date, Senator. We don't believe that is that tends to be the largest part of a participant's budget and the most flexible part. So we hope that gives the ability to purchase as is required.
But for instance, children who are only in receipt of capacity building funding or early intervention wouldn't be able to use those funds to purchase rats, would they?
I'd have to check the detail of that, Senator. We're expecting a lot of children should be receiving access to rats through schools in the current programs that are being rolled out through the state and territory governments, but we're monitoring that closely, and of course we'll make adjustments to our settings if that's needed.
Well, how are you monitoring that? Not all states and territories are doing the same at the school level, are they?
That is true. So, as I said, we have a very open line of communication with providers and, of course, participant representative organisations. And if they're encountering problems there, we would be very happy to receive advice around that.
Yeah, but what are you doing to monitor that? I mean, you're not just
Senator,
sitting there and waiting for feedback.
Oh, no.
Are you actively monitoring that situation where participants that can't use their funding to purchase, if you can find a rat to purchase?
Well, yes, Senator, we are, and we have been meeting quite regularly with the provider sector in terms of how they need and are using access to rapid antigen tests for delivery of supports, and have had several, are having regular conversations with some of the representative organisations about the issues that participants are encountering. I haven't myself, and Mr Mansfield may have more to add to this, had the issue of children and their particular budget structures, but I don't know if Luke wants to add something to that.
Senator, just to add that there is ongoing engagement with the state and territory governments about their responses in relation to rapid antigen tests and indeed PCR testing, and there are weekly meetings with them, at least weekly meetings with them, both as a collective and then separately in relation to bilateral discussions to understand how and where state and territory governments, which have primary responsibility for testing in relation to COVID-19, how they're deploying their testing resources. As you'd be aware, Commonwealth is currently distributing rapid antigen tests from national stockpile into state and territory governments, and they're currently making decisions about how they'll use those. We're in active discussions with the states to understand to what extent some of that supply may also be used to support people with disability, whether inside or outside the NDIS.
Okay, I might just ask you a few more, before I hand over, a few more questions around costs. Are the running costs of the NDIA monitored and evaluated?
In relation to COVID, Senator?
No, just the operation of the NDIA.
Senator Martin Hoffman here again. So, yes, in the same way that the running costs of all government agencies are monitored, there is a separate budget, separate program in the PBS. It is reported separately in our annual report and other government reporting on expenditure, etc. The board has an active role in monitoring our expenditure, and then we're subject to the usual oversight arrangements through ANAO reviews, etc. When I referred earlier in my testimony to the review of scheme costs that the Ministerial Council will do by the end of 23, that's also required to look at agency costs as well as the overall scheme costs as well.
Okay, so you mentioned a review, but is there an ongoing evaluation by the board?
Well, yes, in terms of the PGPA requirements for the corporate plan, the performance statements, and then the annual reporting against those in the agency's annual report.
So who does the evaluation?
Well, consistent with all government agencies, subject to the PGPA, the accountable authority of the agency, which in our case is the board, is responsible for the preparation of the corporate plan, including the performance statements and the performance plan, and then the reporting against those in the annual report. So that is the responsibility of the board.
How much is...
And then I would also say that, Senator, just adding to that answer, we of course are also required under the Act to provide a quarterly report to the Ministerial Council, and that is a very significant report, over 100 pages each quarter, plus many hundreds of pages of data tables looking at the performance of the scheme and the performance of the agency. We have the Participant Service Guarantee legislation, which I believe the Parliament is considering shortly. We've been acting against that, and so we have public reporting against the Participant Service Guarantee in terms of our meeting of timeliness standards for the conduct of the key processes around access and planning decisions. That reporting is reviewed by the Ombudsman's Office to review the accuracy and completeness of that reporting, and the Ombudsman has already, even ahead of the legislation, started to engage with people to understand the framework and systems and processes we use to do that report.
So are the reports that were presented to the state and territory ministers, are they released publicly?
Absolutely, Senator. Those quarterly reports are available. There's a history now of quarterly reports going back since the start of the agency, available on our website.
So I'm talking particularly about you said the report. There's a performance of the agency report.
Yes, so that's included issues to do with that, including our performance against the Participant Service Guarantee is included in that quarterly report. We've started, as it were, voluntarily reporting against that even ahead of the passage of the legislation, and that report is available, as I said, on a quarterly basis, publicly available 1 month or shortly 1 month after the end of each quarter. And so, for example, the December quarter report was made available to the Minister by the end of the month, so yesterday, and will shortly be publicly available.
So it's all of the data and information that's presented to the ministers is that's what is actually released?
Yes.
Right.
Yes, Senator.
Okay. All right. So how much is being spent on external legal advice and lawyers in the last quarter?
So let me just... in the last quarter... Senator, I can't find that piece of information right in front of me at this stage. I'm sure by the time we finish this afternoon, I'll be able to come back to you on that. So
I have a...
I'll either take it on notice or I'll be able to report by the end of the afternoon.
Yeah, that's fine. I've got some... I have a couple of other questions in the same vein. So if that's in the same... If you're in the same position, I'll read them out now. So how much...
Thank you.
So what I also would like to know how much is spent on external legal advice and lawyers that assist with AAT matters.
Yes.
And have you done any work, just while I'm at it, have you done any work of actually evaluating whether the cost of an AAT appeal against the cost of legal advice or external agency resources spent on the appeal?
So I don't, I don't quite follow that.
Oh, sorry.
repeat
Well,
that,
I want to
please?
know whether you've actually had a look at or evaluated the costs of supporting an AAT appeal. Whether it's evaluated, whether it's it's worth spending that money on appealing, the cost benefit of it.
I see. Well, there's a few points to make there in general. Let me come back on the dollars that you were asking about, and that is, firstly, unlike a commercial organisation, government agencies aren't meant under the model litigant obligations to make commercial trade-off judgments about the costs versus the matter at stake. We need to continue to make decisions in respect of the legal position of the Act and rules under which we operate. So we don't have the commercial freedom to say this is an expensive case and therefore we should just settle regardless of the legal rights or wrongs of it. The other point to make is that in AAT matters, we are very much focused on assisting, as we're required to do also under the model litigant obligations, to help the AAT find a preferable decision. Sometimes that can involve seeking further information, seeking further reports that the AAT itself has asked for, and the agency pays for it in doing that, and that gets covered in the sort of costs that are incurred in the case in order to help get to the preferable decision itself. And then the third point I would have to say is that it is also the case that some of these cases, while not being formally legally precedent-setting in themselves, unless they go to the federal courts, do set a direction or a guidance that we take into account, and therefore they have a wider implication on the scheme than just the particular costs of the plan that might be in question in the case. And so that is another factor to be taken into account in terms of looking at the costs.
Right, okay, accept that what you say there, but my question still stands really, have you ever evaluated it anyway?
Well, we certainly look at the costs that we spend and against the total volume of AAT matters. Yes, as I said, doing a straight commercial, this is going to cost a lot, is not an avenue of approach that is open to us under the model litigant approaches. But at the same time, we've got to be reasonable about this, and we always intend to be.
So that work around that evaluation, is that available publicly? Are you able to release that?
We've certainly, in our most recent quarterly report, put a lot more information about AAT cases, their settlement rates. The AAT itself sets out comparative data of NDIA cases versus the other divisions that they operate, etc. And we've previously, through estimates and other vehicles, disclosed expenditure on legal support and other expert witness support in respect of AAT matters, yes.
Right, well, you seem to have brought it together in one document. So is that one document available without people running
The
around
best
it?
document will be our quarterly reports.
So you're not,
which will
it's not available, the evaluation is not available to be released.
There is not a document that you seem to be referring to. The document will be the quarterly report that brings together a range of information, including on AAT cases and expenditure.
You have an understanding of the cost per quarter on legal advice and lawyers for AAT matters. If I could get that information on notice, that'd be good.
Yes, Senator, I'm very happy to do that.
So I might, if I get that, then I might, because there'll be questions from that information that I'm sure I'll want to ask some more questions on. But for now, thank you.
And Senator, there is a previous, we have disclosed this in a previous estimates question on notice.
Yes.
So several times. So that's available now.
Okay. Thank you. So thank you, Mr. Hoffman. So Chair, I'll leave it for now. I'll see how we go for time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Senator Hughes.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Hoffman, I just was wondering with regards to the actuarial figures that have been looked at, has there been much analysis or consideration given to the early upfront costs of intensive early intervention and the longer term benefits over the life of that child? We've seen some figures previously for every dollar spent sort of under 12 or so, that you see a return of $3 to $4 over the life of that child. And I mean, we do know that the largest cost within the NDIS is around the SIL provisions. So having some analysis around investing in proper early intervention and intensive early intervention, having benefits into the future that less and less people will be going into those sort of more expensive SIL options.
So I might thank you, Senator. It's an important point for sure. I might ask Sarah to comment on the actuarial forecasting approach in the AFSR and how that's taken into account.
Thanks, Martin. Just checking, can people hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So Sarah Johnson, Scheme Actuary of the NDIS. The way in which we look at the forecasts is we look at it in quite a lot of detail, Senator Hughes. We look at cohorts by age, disability, functional ability, whether or not they're in SIL and gender, and we have estimates at each age group about how much that is costing. In terms of understanding the lifetime cost of participants that you talk about there, or the upfront early intervention and the then later benefits, we are monitoring that really closely. So we're looking at all of the
Sorry, did anyone...
Ms Johnson, I think you've dropped out.
basis and understanding how much we're wasting time. Can you hear me again now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yeah, we've got you again now.
Sorry, so I think I was just describing the projection model by the different groups. So age, disability, function, and whether or not the participants in SIL. We then look at the longitudinal history of that, so how much we're spending over time. At the moment, even for our participants who are in the early intervention, it's been 5 years or so, we're spending more each year. We haven't seen any necessary reductions yet or benefits coming from that early intervention support. So we're continuing to monitor that, and then we'll be able to have a better idea of the extent to which some of the early intervention is going to result in reduced costs over time. Keeping in mind the scheme hasn't actually been running for huge amounts of time yet in most instances.
No, so you obviously, it hasn't been running long enough to see someone who entered in the early intervention stages at, say, 2, and then, where they're landing at 25. But I'm interested to know how you're monitoring this. We have discussed this in the past. I know our estimates, Mr. Hoffman, around any decent early intervention program takes data. And they take data on how many times the child participates in each session, whether that's an in-clinic with a specialist or with a parent or carer, what sort of developments they're making, what programs or what goals they're achieving, and how much they are actually developing. And I know that we're not still looking, we're not doing anything in that space. So I'm interested how we actually know kids that are coming into the early childhood program, if they're being properly supported and if they're making the gains that kids can make if they get the right early intervention.
Sarah, do you wanted to talk to that? I can certainly make some comments.
Yeah, I'm happy to make a couple of comments to start with. As Mr. Hopper mentioned previously, we do have an outcomes framework which we're monitoring to understand the extent to which kids are developing their social skills, their relationships with family, friends, etc., their social participation, their participation in school. So we are monitoring those things along with the costs that are going into the plans and being spent on early intervention. And we do see some gains there. We have seen some increased participation as an example. However, again, we're building up that longitudinal history to be able to better put more robust figures on it over time.
And then I'd just add, Senator, that it is the case that we, through the Early Childhood Partner Network, who are the main point of contact, as you know, with many of these families, they are seeking reporting on goals, on progress, on the sort of interventions that are being used. And so, in fact, under the Early Childhood Reset program that we've spoken about, we're seeking to improve that reporting template. We've been working with a number of organisations and groups and researchers to do exactly that, to continue to improve the formal reporting of progress and outcomes that we get from the early childhood investment space.
Mm-hmm. So, Mr. Hunt, this might be sort of just more of a comment, but, I'm still hearing from parents regularly going through the early childhood intervention scheme that are being told by planners, specifically, we do not fund ABA, which is against the principles of the scheme, because apart from it being best practice therapy, it's all about choice and control, and if that's the type of therapy that best suits your family, I don't understand why the NDIS is persisting on telling parents they don't fund it. But we're also still hearing reports of parents being told they need to have 3 expulsions from a mainstream preschool before they're going to be funded into a disability-specific preschool. And I mean, that's just, apart from the fact it's cruel, no preschool is going to write a letter saying we're expelling this autistic child or behaviour, because, we're expelling them. They're just not going to do it. Their own reputation on the line. So these are still reports that we're getting. So maybe if you can just take that on notice, that these are the things that we're still hearing, that are still happening. And, we really do need to somehow communicate with LACs or planners that it's actually not up to them to tell the parents what type of programs they can do and can't do. It's what's reasonable and necessary for the child. Just with regards
to... So, Senator, let me just say, we fund hundreds of millions of dollars of ABA services.
But they're still being told that not everyone's got that memo. If every planner and every LAC had got the memo, then I wouldn't be getting around 10 phone calls a week from parents absolutely frustrated that the planner has told them out and out they don't fund ABA. I mean, this is just happening far too often. And it doesn't matter how many times you and I sit in estimates on these hearings and you tell me that's not the case. And I know people that are getting funding for ABA, but it's still dependent on whatever specific planner or LAC you get as to what information is being relayed. So it's not universal.
Senator, the scheme is meant to make individual-based decisions as to that. I don't... Well, we fund ABA. We also make decisions about what is reasonable and necessary. And, we've spent a lot of time at your request directly working with one of the major ABA providers to put those arrangements in place. So, we're certainly doing just that.
Yeah, well, you and I keep on it.
Okay.
In light of that, one of the things we've also talked about previously is disability-specific planners. But also one of the things that I'm seeing with people coming to me is a lack of understanding of stage of life. And again, we're about to release our autism interim report pretty soon. And there seems to be a lack of understanding about the stage of life that kids go through. So obviously you've got, you transition to school, post that sort of intensive early intervention at the beginning, transition to high school, transition into employment and independent living. But there's also things like puberty that come up that are particularly challenging times for some of these developmentally delayed children. And they're not getting the support at those critical junctures of life because people aren't, plans aren't dialing up and down as they need to. But if parents or carers are supported through that planning process of you're about to hit puberty, these things are going to start to come up. Is there any movement towards looking at planners and LACs who actually have specialised skills or at least some understanding of what a disability group in particular, because what an autistic cohort need is very different from a multiple sclerosis cohort, for example, or a quadriplegic cohort. So someone who actually understands the challenges that are going to come up at those different times, rather than, everyone having to foresee things, which quite often parents don't really know what's coming at them.
So, Senator, clearly we want to continue to improve the experience and the quality of our planning engagement. We've spoken about the early childhood reset, about we have a separate partner network, as you know, for those, and moving to a dedicated internal agency planning team for that. And we need to continue to seek to upskill our planners, on a whole range of issues that get raised as to what is required, including stage of life, as you said, as well as disability type and so forth.
Yeah. Is there any review of the LAC providers, with regards to those that seem to generate the most number of reviews of plans or challenges, ending up in the AAT through particular LAC providers that perhaps are not, as effective as others?
So in terms of the AAT, just the technical answer would be that the AAT goes to a delegate decision, which is only within the agency. So it's an agency decision rather than a LAC action that is at the AAT. Certainly, we have in our agreements with the LACs a performance and reporting framework. We give regular feedback to them in terms of in terms of their performance against that framework. And I'd be happy to provide more detail about that on notice if you wish, Senator.
Yeah, no, I would, and I'd be interested to know if there's been any LACs that have, basically been told their services are no longer required because they generate excessive numbers of requests for review, etc.
We've had some LACs exit and change for a range of reasons. We have not terminated any LAC in that way. Okay.
It was mentioned at the beginning that there's.
And I would just add also, Senator, it's the current LAC contracts and EC contracts across the country will expire at the end of or middle of 23, and so we're currently actively working on the renewal of those, which will provide an opportunity for new providers for consideration of the performance of existing providers, and that's an important and really big project for us over the next 12 to 18 months to get right.
Excellent. That'll be something we'll obviously be keen to have a look at with you. It was mentioned at the beginning that there were over 500,000 participants now. Do you have any sense how many of them actually don't meet the criteria of a permanent and significant lifelong disability?
Sarah, do you have the...
I'll just look that up for you, Senator. It's the Scheme Actuary, Sarah Johnson of the NDIA. We know how many people have met the entry criteria on the basis of Section 24, which is the permanent criteria, versus the Section 25, which is the early intervention criteria. So I'll just find those stats for you now.
So, because I mean, obviously, there's kids going through the early childhood stream who are staying in the scheme longer term, but are entering with out of diagnosis of anything, and you know the scheme is for permanent and significant lifelong disability. So it'd be just interesting to know how those costs are continuing when some of the entry points for early childhood, which I'm not disagreeing with, but are around developmental delays, not permanent disability. So you know, it'd be interesting to see not we're moving enough of those kids out of the scheme as was intended. Just one quick question, which is, we did make a recommendation. I know we talked about moving funds to a single bucket because, you know, people trying to understand the difference between social and community and participation and daily living skills when trying to work out where to pay for things, you know, is very muddled. And there was some conversation around moving to just one single bucket for your plan. Is that still in the works, looking like happening?
Well, Senator, there's a range of factors there. It's appropriate. We certainly want to move in the direction of more flexibility and more simplicity. The new CRM business system that we're building currently and will start to come online through this year will enable some of that. There will still be the need, I think, to differentiate, say, between a capital item, be it a piece of assistive technology or a home modification, etc., and ensure that that is spent in that way. Likewise, where you have a strongly committed support, be it SDA accommodation payments or even SIL attendant care, you would want to see that protected and reserved and made sure that it is available, given that they are sort of essential services. So I don't think it heads to one complete bucket, but I think it does head towards more flexibility with some of those sorts of restraints that I just mentioned.
Yeah, the more arbitrary, like as I said, daily living skills versus social and community participation, some of those, I mean, they just sort of, they're the same thing for a lot of people. So just finally, we always have a lot of conversations around participant costs. We don't seem to get very far when we want to talk about providers. And we do know that some providers are charging excessive rates. If you go to a psychologist as a private patient, you get charged one rate. If you've got the veterans card, you get another rate. If you've got a healthcare card, you get another rate. And generally, we're saying if you've got an NDIS plan, you get the highest rate. We also know there's providers who are double, triple, if not more, dipping when they head out to rural and regional areas, more remote areas, and charging each and every client that they see for travel. Has there been an examination of how we can pull provider costs back, whether or not the price guide is something that we need to continue with, because we see that providers are charging at the top of the price guide regardless, and you know, whether or not there is some serious review being undertaken with regards to providers, how they charge, whether or not they're charging multiple forms of travel on the same day, in a bid to actually ensure. We talk about sustainability and reining in costs. Well, if we're charging for 4 people for travel and those participants are only paying a quarter of the cost, that the participant will get more out of their plan.
Yes, Senator. So some great points there. In respect of therapy costs and the price limits for therapy, that is explicitly one of the key topics in the current price review. So there's exactly work going on right now around the appropriate price limits in respect of therapy services. And I am aware that it is often seen to be the case that the NDIA price limits can be seen as higher than other, be it Commonwealth or state and territory schemes. And so I don't want to make a statement, preempting the price review and appropriate decision making, but just to say that there's absolutely a key part of the review, the current price review, which will be considered shortly. And then where there is mischarging, we're very active now in and improving our capabilities all the time to be monitoring through data analytics the claims flow. We've been going out to thousands of providers with letters saying, not saying you're doing the wrong thing, but the data says this is a bit unusual, or words to that effect. And that's been having a very strong impact in terms of tens of millions of dollars of withdrawn claims, and through a behaviour model, estimates of even more significant avoided future claims that don't meet standards. So we're very actively focused on the provider side of this question, and not about just on the participant side.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. Thank you, Chair.
Senator Steele-John.
Sorry. Just quickly, it's Sarah Johnson, the Scheme Actuary. I did find the figures for misuse on the early intervention versus permanent disability criteria split. As at 30 September 2021, of the 484,700 participants in the scheme, 122,765 entered under Section 25 of the Act, early intervention, and 361,935 entered under the permanent disability or Section 24 criteria.
Okay, and I think it'll be interesting to keep following that up on how many are then leaving the scheme. I know that, we're still quite young.
Correct.
But how many are leaving the scheme? Good idea
Correct.
to keep an eye. That's a
We
lot
do,
of people.
and it's monitored in the AFSR, and we do talk quite a lot about the number that exit the scheme.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Senator Steele-John.
Thanks very much, Chair. So in relation to the Taylor-Fry report that we've got in front of us, am I right in understanding that it was undertaken by the Victorian government? Is that correct?
Are we on mute? Yes. Peter Broadhead here. So it was work requested by disability ministers, so that's all disability ministers, state, territory and Commonwealth. It was taken forward by a group of officials, the chair of whom was a Victorian official, and so it was actually the Victorian Department of Families, Fairness and Housing that led the contract for the Taylor-Fry to do that work. But it was work that was supported across all jurisdictions, including by a reference group, so there were regular meetings of officials across state, territory and Commonwealth to ask questions and interact with Taylor-Fry in the conduct of the work. And the report was then brought back to ministers for the December meeting last year.
All right. And in terms of the brief, if you like, that they were given, the nature of that brief, was that composed by disability ministers, or was that put together by the Victorian Department of Communities? Who led in that work?
I think it's fair to say that there was a work program put to ministers, and in that there was specific requests from ministers to better understand more information about cost drivers and the assumptions in the annual financial sustainability report, and indeed in successive annual financial sustainability reports. The actual detail of what was put to market by or it was put for quote, I think, by Victoria, they held the pen on it, but again, there was input from jurisdictions to that.
All right, Mr. Broadhead, you broke up a bit there, and the bit you broke up in was where you were outlining some of the factors of the work program. So could I get you to just repeat that, please?
So the disability ministers, and I think this is summarised in the communique that was issued from the August meeting of ministers, requested work be done to better understand the cost drivers in the scheme and the assumptions in the annual financial sustainability report, and indeed drawing on the modelling that was done for the AFSR and the data that was used in the AFSR. So early in the piece, what was provided to Taylor Fry was indeed the data and modelling that had underpinned the annual financial sustainability report and previous ones, so that they could look at how it was done and how to produce the estimates or the projections.
Yes, okay. So just so that I understand the process correctly, and I remember reading the communique. So the work program outlined in the communique was put to tender by the Victorian government, was translated into a contract or a form upon which you could bid, if you like, and then they then selected Taylor Fry from a number of different applicants. Is that the process?
Yes, so they have, like many government departments, they have what are called panel contracts, so people have already tendered on certain parts of terms and conditions to offer services. My understanding is it was, and I know this because I was one of the members of the selection panel, so it was a selection panel that was led by Victoria but also included representation from the Commonwealth and from New South Wales. They just happened to be the jurisdictions that were involved. But the brief that was let was discussed amongst jurisdictions, and then the work was, as I say, undertaken. Again, a department has to lead because you can't do it as a consortium across government departments in a technical way, but so they were the lead hand, the Victorians were the lead hand, but they were doing it on behalf of all jurisdictions, including the Commonwealth.
And Mr. Broadhead, would you be able to provide, or would somebody else in the agency be able to provide to the committee the wording of the contract that was put out to then be bid on?
I honestly, I would have to go to the Victorians because it's in a sense theirs rather than mine to establish whether that's possible.
Okay.
Senator, could I just perhaps assist? Do you mean the contract for services, or do you mean the terms of reference that they were sort of reporting against?
Both.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So terms of reference against which they're reporting is useful, but I'm actually looking for when they signed up to do the job, what was the job they were asked to do in the substance of their contract, if you like. Yeah, so that's what I'm looking for. Mr. Broadhead, can we ask as a committee that you do engage the Victorian government to see if they can provide that information?
Yeah, I will.
Okay, thank you. And could I also ask, do we know how because it was a piece of work that Victorians undertook, but at the request of the DRC, what was the cost sharing arrangement for the report?
The cost sharing arrangement for the cost of the report was the traditional formula between the states and the Commonwealth, which is that half the costs are met by the Commonwealth and the rest are distributed amongst the other jurisdictions in proportion to their population. Right, and what was the overall cost of the report? I don't know whether that's commercially sensitive or not for Taylor Fry. I'm sorry, I'll take it on notice. If they're comfortable with that being provided, I'm happy to provide it.
Okay, excellent. And how many other entities bid for the contract?
There were...
To be considered by the panel, I should say.
There were, from memory, there were three main in the final assessment.
Three in the final assessment, and then you, as a member of a selection panel that included a representative from New South Wales and Victoria, selected Taylor Fry from those three applications.
Correct. Not to take the committee through the process, but I had to undertake sort of signed various documents that are Victorian in origin about what I could and couldn't reveal and all of that sort of thing because of the nature of their confidence, commercial and confidence arrangements. So I'm partly still bound by those, but I wasn't there. I was there, you know, to help them select, as was the New South Wales person.
And what can you tell us about your selection criteria for that?
I prefer to take that on notice. There was a particular set of things put out, and they were evaluated against each of those. As always with all such evaluations, different bids had different strengths and weaknesses, and in the end, those were worked through and balanced out, and the conclusion that the group came to was unanimous.
Yes, I understand. Just trying to get a sense of what you were looking for in the candidates you were reviewing.
In general terms, it's the capacity to do the work requested, and then balanced against value for money, the cost of getting it done. So if two applicants were roughly equal in terms of their capacity, but one was more expensive, then you would go for the one that was less expensive who could do the work. If on the other hand, there were differences in costs, but one was clearly ahead in terms of their capacity to do the work, then you would tend to go with the capacity to do the work rather than separate them on price.
Yeah, okay. I'm just going to Mr. Hoffman in relation to a response you gave a bit earlier, just so that I'm clear on your position. When you were talking about the issue of the agency's role or otherwise as a model litigant in AAT processes, is it your understanding that the agency is not required to act as a model litigant under the relevant model litigant guidance and regulation pieces? Is that your understanding?
No, Senator.
Okay, so can you give me I perceived in the answer to your to Senator Brown, and this one I've seen clarification, that you were saying that the agency was not either able or required, was potentially your language, to follow litigant guidance, but I just wanted to clear that up with you. What is your view on the subject?
No, we are subject to the model litigant requirement, and no dispute or question or about that. The point I was trying to make very quickly was that one of the requirements in that is that we don't apply a sort of a crude, commercial judgment. We should stop or go forward on the basis of costs. We need to still be referring back to the legal position and legal obligation of the agency under the Act and the rules. That was the point I was making, which is actually one of the model litigant obligations that we are bound by.
Right. Okay, that makes more sense. All right. Thanks for clearing it up. And I think you referenced that you said words to the effect of obviously the question of cost is a factor that you consider in some of the decisions around places before the AAT. Is that consideration process in any way formalised, and if not, who makes the judgment call there?
Senator, so I meant that in the context that, like with any costs that an agency incurs, we need to make sure that we are spending appropriately, effectively, efficiently the PGPA requirements, and so that's what I was referring to. The AAT works in a particular area of the agency, and ultimately external legal costs, the decision maker there is the General Counsel of the agency.
And who is the General Counsel currently? Remind me.
Ms. Christine Burke.
Christine Burke. Okay. So Ms. Burke makes a call. Is it on a case-by-case basis in relation to cases, or are there rules that guide her decision making?
I was saying that she, as General Counsel, has the responsibility and the delegation in respect of external legal costs, and so has that obligation to ensure that we spend our agency monies, effectively and efficiently.
Yes, absolutely. But does she make? Are you aware of the process that Ms. Burke actually goes through there? Is it a process of individually case by case determining whether the legal fees are appropriate in relation to those guidelines, or is there more of a framework around that decision making process, a policy or a agency guideline?
Senator, if I could take that question on notice, and I can give you a formal answer setting out the way that works.
Okay, thank you. I'll be with you.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate that.
Ms. Payne.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Hoffman. I just first keen to revisit the issue of rapid antigen tests, and just interested in your response to the widespread reporting that we've seen of people with disability unable to access really crucial supports, like people coming to help shower them or feed them because they don't have access to rapid antigen tests for those people. And I just interested in your response to that and why this wasn't seen as a key priority for the NDIS.
Senator, I'll ask Ms. Studdert to comment on that, who's been taking the lead on our COVID-related activities.
Thank you, Senator. So,
sorry, I'm not a senator, by the way.
Well, sorry, Ms. Payne. Senate estimates too ingrained in my past. We have engaged closely with the sector and, as I said earlier, with disability representative organisations about the challenges being faced. And as we know, access to rapid antigen tests has been a widespread challenge for many parts of the economy over the last several weeks. We also have engaged closely with the NDIS Commission, which is the recipient of reports where there are disruptions to continuity of services for NDIS participants. There undoubtedly have been many reports received over the last month, but we work closely with providers where there are challenges to ensuring services continue. And I can say in all cases that the agency has worked with, we have ensured that services have continued. We had backup plans in place for supporting providers where they did have challenges with workforce supply. We have engaged with a number of providers to support them in utilising the workforce they have to continue services. And in all cases where the Commission has made us aware of challenges, we've been able to successfully ensure services have continued. We've also, of course, worked closely with our Department of Health colleagues to work on supply as it becomes available, and to ensure the disability sector will be part of the considerations for where those supplies will be prioritised as they become available.
So can we expect to see any change in the policy around the rapid antigen tests not being claimable for people other than those in group homes?
We have made provision, we have clarified for all NDIS participants that they can use core budget supports to pay for rapid antigen tests where they are necessary to ensure service continuity. So that is not limited to group homes or disability accommodation. Still, providers who are providing the support in group homes are able to purchase tests themselves and claim directly from the agency for those. So there's a couple of measures in place to enable the financing of rapid antigen tests where they're required for service delivery.
Okay, so I just wanted to reference the article in The Guardian on the 20th of January, which talks about Carolyn Campbell McLean, who has spent $1,300 on rapid antigen tests and was told she couldn't claim it back from the NDIS. So is that, are you saying that that position has been clarified, that those...
Yes, it has. Since that time it has, and we can certainly follow up with Ms McLean and ensure that she's aware of that.
Okay, thank you. So what about the issue of actually sourcing the tests, like aside from the cost, which is obviously prohibitive for many people with disability? How will the NDIS ensure that people can actually access the tests that they need, or that the workforce can access the tests that they need to ensure the continuity of supports?
So I might let Mr Mansfield say a bit about this as well, but we have worked, as I said, we are working very closely with the Department of Health and the procurement processes that the government is involved in. So we're tracking supply closely, and we're hoping that it will become more readily available very soon.
Ms Payne, just to add to that, the Department of Health has been obviously integrally involved in looking at options for securing more supply, both for Commonwealth purposes and to support state and territory governments in their responsibilities in relation to testing. They've been seeking to identify additional sources of supply and been very active in that space, and we are working with them on a almost daily basis to identify potential options that could be over time made available to different vulnerable groups across the community, including in relation to disability. And of course, the Prime Minister announced on 5 January that up to 10 rapid antigen tests can be accessed by Commonwealth concession card holders, and that benefits around 82% of NDIS participants 16 and over. I'm aware that in terms of community pharmacy supply settings, that there has been, an increase in stock, significant increases in stock reported by community pharmacies over the last few weeks, for example, and that we would anticipate that those supplies will continue to increase over coming weeks, particularly as we pass the Chinese New Year, noting that there's fairly significant suppliers from that part of the world.
Okay, thank you. I'll move on now to some questions around sustainability of the scheme. So, have participant plans been identified as an area to reduce spending?
Ms Payne, thank you. No, we continue to make individualised decisions about participant plans at first plan and at review in accordance with the Act and the rules.
Okay. So what are the current measures to reduce participant spending? Which areas or cohorts are seen as the main areas that need to be addressed?
So, Senator, as was stated at the start of the hearing by Mr Broadhead, participant spending is continuing to increase and increase strongly both in aggregate and on a per participant basis. As we released on the 15th of January, for the 6 months December 21 compared to the 6 months December 20, average spend for participants in those two periods was up by 12%. So on a per participant basis for that 6 month versus 6 month period, participant spending per participant was up 12%. So we're continuing to see growth in expenditure as participants use their plans. And so there's not a approach to target reducing expenditure of individual participants at all.
Okay, in that case, how many plan reviews have resulted in a reduction of funding in the last quarter?
So, Senator, if we go to think Ms Johnson will have it to hand as well, but I just need to get the right bit of paper in front of me.
I'm happy to start. In terms of the most recent results that we have at hand, the published 30 September 2021 quarterly report indicated in the 12 months to 30 September 2021, 38% of plans increased by more than 5%, 38% of plans decreased by more than 5%, and 24% stayed within 5%. In the 2 years prior to that, so to 30 September 2020, we had...
Hi, do you have the Burst of Destiny Yu-Gi-Oh card? I think I did call earlier. They said there was some here.
Brown, I think you're still on the call.
I'm on mute.
Senator Brown, I think you should put your microphone on mute. Go ahead, whoever was speaking. Sorry, I was distracted.
Sorry, it's Miss Johnson's Scheme Actuary of the NDIS. I was talking about the increases and decreases in plan values. I'd provided the increases and decreases in plan values to the 12 months to 30 September 2021. And then the prior 2 years, so in the 12 months to 30 September 2020, 55% of plans increased at review by more than 5%, 24% decreased by more than 5%, and 21% stayed within 5%. And then the year before that, we had 56% of plans increased at review by more than 5%, 30% decreased by more than 5%, and 14% stayed within 5%. So we have had plans increase and decrease as would be expected over the last 3 years.
Okay, would it be possible to table that comparison showing the trends for major areas of the scheme across each state and territory?
Yes, we can take that on notice. The report itself does include those things, but we would need to pull the data on state and territory as well.
Okay, thank you. How many plans with a reduction in funding have had all or some of the supports restored at the AAT in the last 12 months?
Senator, have to try and take that on notice. It will be difficult to track all the way through, but I understand the question and we'll take that on notice.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, SIL is a costly area of the NDIS, which covers a small number of participants with high support needs. Are you seeking to reduce spending on SIL, and has the median SIL plan size gone down in the last quarter?
Senator, SIL expenditure grew very strongly for the previous 3 years or so. We've then, over the last 6 months, seen a moderation of that and a flattening of that. And consistent again with the data that overall that Ms Johnson gave, we continued to see some SIL plans increase and increase strongly and some decrease as well, balancing out, as I said, to that flat outcome over the last 6 to 9 months or so.
Okay. People with autism on the scheme make up the largest cohort by disability type. Are you currently looking at the plans of people with supports for autism as an area to reduce costs? And has the median plan size for autism gone down in the last quarter?
Senator, I'll take the specific question about the median plan size over the last quarter on notice, unless Ms Johnson has got it to hand. Again, we are not targeting any cohort or any age group or any area for reductions. We're continuing to make individual decisions on plan reviews in accordance with the Act and rules.
Okay. Sorry.
I can take on notice the specifics on the autism, but certainly in the year to date, the median average cost per participant has increased.
Okay. It would be good if you could take on notice with regard to autism packages. That would be good. Thank you.
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. And sorry, Mr. Hoffman, I'm not a senator.
Oh, I've done the same mistake. I sincerely apologise.
All good. SDA spending is significantly currently under projections. Is that correct?
Senator, oh, sorry.
No, go on, Sarah.
Currently, there is over 16,000 participants receiving the SDA support. It is expected that will grow over time and increase. So there is, I wouldn't say there was a reduced number of people receiving SDA, but we do expect it to increase over time.
Okay, so it is under projections?
It's not under projection as such. It's projected to increase over the next 10 years in the projection period.
Okay, so why do you think it's lower than it would be? Why is that?
The main area of, and Sarah will comment further, but the main area of growth that we see to come are people who are currently in primarily state and territory facilities, sort of legacy SDA type facilities or historic. They don't necessarily have SDA in their plan as yet, but we expect as we work with states and territories and that legacy housing stock is improved, modified, replaced, etc., those people will need SDA in their plans and that will be the major contributor to the continuing expected, as Sarah said, growth in the number of participants with SDA.
Okay.
So surprise, yeah.
If I could just add to that, there is also the growth that will come with the ongoing efforts around the younger people in residential aged care as we work with them individually to identify housing goals and to support moving out of residential aged care as maybe the goals of many of those, that the SDA will be added to plans.
Okay, thank you. How many participants are exiting the scheme and what are the main reasons?
So it's Sarah Johnson, Scheme Actuary. In terms of the number of people that are exiting the scheme, I'll just pull it up for you. We do have it in the AFSR. We look at it from 2 points of view. We look at it from mortality and then we look at it for participants who are exiting the scheme not through mortality. A bit under 1% of our participants each year exit through mortality, and it's a similar percentage who also exit through non-mortality. The main reasons are children who receive early intervention support who then exit to mainstream and community. Another reason would be we have some participants who are over the age of 65 and are ultimately better supported in a residential aged care facility. So those older participants can exit to residential aged care. And they'd be the two main reasons for non-mortality exits, along with those exiting through mortality.
Okay, thank you. One last question from me. How many participants have been reassessed for NDIS eligibility in the last year, and how does that compare with previous quarters? Oh, sorry, in the last quarter, and how does that compare with previous quarters?
In terms of eligibility reassessment, I will have to specifically take those figures on notice for the last quarter. From memory, though, there hasn't been a significant increase in the last quarter in non-mortality exits. In fact, I think it was slightly lower this quarter than the previous quarters.
Okay, thank you. I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Can I just check that Ms. Coker's online? If not, I've just got a couple more questions if none of my colleagues have any further questions.
Chair, it's Carol. I have a follow-up question after you, if you don't mind.
No, you go ahead now then. I can...
Okay, great. I just wanted to follow up Ms. Payne's question about purchasing of RAPs. and she gave an example of that, about a participant incurring significant costs. I wonder that within that purchase coming out of her core support, that is an amount of money that wouldn't have been put in there, especially for RAT purchases. So it has to come from somewhere. Is there do they get an increased amount on their core supports, or do they have to just, consume that within their original budget?
Senator, as a proportion of plans, we expect the expense will be small, but we will certainly recognise that for some participants this may not be accommodated, and as is always the case, participants can approach the agency for adjustments to plan budgets if they are close to expending the current provisions.
So you didn't really answer my question. So you're
sorry,
Senator. Basically, the budget they've got that would have been allocated for other supports and services now has to be diverted to buy RATs.
Senator, you have to also, Martin Hoffman here, put that in the context of, on average, significant underutilisation of the plan and therefore available capacity within the core budget for these is precisely why there is, to some extent, underutilisation. But as Ms Studdert said, we have a ability to do a rapid top-up for those who might be right at the limit of their plan.
But when we're talking about participants that still receive the supports and services, particularly those in supported independent living and other provider-supported accommodation, if they use all their money and they've had significant RAT purchases, what's the process in receiving a top-up, as you put it?
So,
well, we go on, Sarah. Go on, Lisa.
The participant can contact the agency and ask for a top-up of planned funds if as Mr Hoffman said, they've expended all of their core budget and that extra capacity is needed for ongoing purchasing of rapid antigen tests.
So what's the process to request a top-up? It's not just a phone call, is it?
Yes, it is, Senator. It's a phone call to the National Contact Centre, and then because we're not doing face-to-face planning in most cases now for obvious reasons, that can be done over the phone.
So that's the entire process. I ring up, I say, I've used all my core supports funding, and I need a top-up of my funding, and you'll just put it in, will you?
Well, Senator, it'd be referred to the planner, the appropriate planner, the contact planner for that participant. Obviously, you've got to look at the plan details and see where the utilisation and the available funds is up to, but make that decision. And I've spoken personally with the leads of our participant delivery area to make sure that sort of process is as simple and streamlined as possible in those circumstances where it's required.
I don't really get. Can we put on notice then? Can I get a proper detail about as to exactly what is the process? Because it's not simply a phone call. That's just to initiate the discussion about receiving extra funds.
Yes, Senator, happy to do that.
Thank Thank you.
Senator Steele, John.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yes, I do actually just have one additional question of clarification. Just wanted to check, I think it was Ms Johnson who gave an answer a little bit earlier in relation to exit numbers from the scheme. I just wanted to clarify I think that you gave two figures for the cohorts that most exit, the highest number of exits in the scheme. Could you just repeat those for me?
Yes, Senator. So Sarah Johnson, Scheme Actuary of the NDIS. In terms of the number of exits, so 21,541 participants have exited the scheme as at 30 September 2021 since the scheme's inception. Approximately half of those are through mortality. Then the other half are participants who have not exited through mortality, so mortality and non-mortality being the biggest groups. Of the non-mortality exits, children exiting to community and mainstream supports after receiving early intervention supports would be the main reason. The other reason I said was some of our participants over the age of 65, as per the NDIS Act, can exit to residential aged care if it's the most appropriate setting.
Okay, so so they can make that choice, but they also don't have to make that choice.
Correct.
If they don't feel it's the most appropriate setting for them. That's still the process, yeah.
Correct.
All right, and in terms of the exit rates in relation to mortality, have you recorded has the agency record cause of exit beyond mortality?
We don't have all the specific reasons
Yes.
of mortality recorded in our data. We do link our information with births, deaths and marriages, so we are able to understand which participants have died and make appropriate amendments to the system on that basis, but we don't record the specific reason of death.
All right, and in relation specifically to the pandemic, has the agency been linking that data to be able to give us a clear line of sight of how many participants have exited due to COVID?
Senator.
So the NDIS, the NDIS Commission reports on that, and I think Mr. Mansfield.
Oh yes, they do. You're right. Apologies. Yes.
Senator, I can provide information on that if that would be helpful.
Yes, please.
So, as you would be aware, providers are asked to report on cases of infection or health impacts of participants to the NDIS Commission. And I can tell you that between March 2020 and 31 January 2022, 51 deaths have been reported to the Commission. It's important to note, though, in that context that it's not necessarily, or it's unknown whether the cause of death was from COVID or another reason, but the reporting is reflecting that at the time they went to hospital, that they had COVID at that time. The other thing, just to put into context, Senator, is just the mortality rate of NDIS participants versus the broader population. So the mortality rate per 100,000 is lower than the broader population. So there have been 10.79 deaths per 100,000 participants, and that compares to 14.46 per 100,000 in the broader Australian community.
And in terms of when those exits that we can potentially link to COVID occurred in that 2-year period, are you able to tell me how many have occurred during the latest Omicron rate?
I don't have with me, Senator, a time series as you're describing, but I can take that on notice and follow up with the Commission in relation to that.
if you could, potentially not by, I can see the challenge of doing it by COVID. But if you could provide me with the 54 and a timeline of when those exits were recorded.
Yes, 51, Senator, and I will do that.
And also, could you provide me with the state-based breakdown of those exits? Do you have that information?
I will provide that information. I do have that information, Senator.
Okay.
So, 19 in New South Wales, 19 deaths. 5 in South Australia and 24 in Victoria.
Okay. Thank you very much. Could you provide me with, maybe this is on notice, but have you got any other kind of, obviously de-identified but demographic information in relation to those particular exits?
I don't have demographic information, and I should add, Senator, that just looking at that, I don't think that adds up to 51, and I think that's because we don't record for less than 5. If there's been less than 5 in a particular jurisdiction, we haven't recorded it for exactly the reason you mentioned around remaining de-identified. But so those numbers are for jurisdictions where there were 5 or more participant deaths.
5 or more participants. Okay, thank you very much for that. That's it for me, Chair.
Just a couple of final questions from me then. Is there any update you can provide on any plans to establish the reserve fund?
Peter Broadhead, Group Manager in DSS. That's still currently referred to the Council on Federal Financial Relations as part of a broader review of intergovernment agreements. And so there isn't as yet any outcome from that I'm aware of.
Right. Secondly, is there any work being undertaken to analyse flow-on economic benefits of the NDIS to the community broadly?
There's no work going on, as a project as such that I'm aware of to do that. There has been some coverage of a report that was commissioned by National Disability Services, which attempted to put a view about that, but that's the only one that I'm aware of in the last 12 months or so.
Right. And what about any cross-budgetary savings flowing from the NDIS expenditure?
Again, not off the, I take that on notice, but I'm not aware that there is a particular, as again, project as it were looking at that. There might be some work going on in various parts about, ons and offs in a particular program, but I'm not aware that there's any concerted project across sort of government areas of activity to say, are there significant shifts due to the NDIS?
Right. And just finally from me, will the Productivity Commission be asked to review NDIS costs ahead of the next round of bilateral agreements?
So that's who will do the independent review. So Mr Hoffman referred earlier to the fact that there is in the bilateral agreement there will be a review before the end of 2023 is the way the agreements are worded. In the past that has been the Productivity Commission, and therefore it's entirely open that it might yet again be the Productivity Commission that does that. And that would be to follow up, if you like, the cost study they did in 2017. The terms of reference to that have to be agreed between ministers. So while it's in the agreements that it will be done, the exact terms of reference and so on are yet to be settled between ministers, let alone who will actually undertake it. But yes, so that's probably all I can say.
Yes, good. No, thank you. Unless any colleagues have any further questions, I think that concludes our questioning. So on behalf of the committee, can I thank you all for your contribution to today's hearing. Any supplementary material can be forwarded to the committee secretariat, and if you have further responses to questions on notice, we'd appreciate if we could have those answers, excuse me, by the 28th of February. Can I thank my colleagues for their participation? Can I thank the Secretariat for its ongoing work, parliamentary broadcasting and Hansard? And I adjourn this hearing.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Bye all.